name of Christ. Amen.
Amen.
While today is, in fact, the fourth Sunday after Epiphany, it's our custom on the Sunday of our annual meeting and dinner to, in the language of the church, translate the Feast of Stephen to this day, whatever day it might be that we have the annual meeting. Just seems appropriate. And so the readings today are those for the Feast of Stephen. So, why do we use this person's name as the name of our church? This is not a quiz. I'll give you the answer. Or at least I'll give you my answer. The whole notion of a patron of a congregation, and ours is the Church of St. Stephen. He is our patron. And you might regard a patron a bit like a stained glass window. Okay? A stained glass window, or even say an icon. With a stained glass window, if you have an image of an individual, you see the face. The light shines through the colored glass, but it's not just the light, because the light carries with it this image of this person. And so a patron for a congregation is a bit like this window. We receive the light, the divine light, but filtered through this particular individual, Stephen, and with it, it begins to shape us as a people, as a congregation, as a community. So what is the story of Stephen that has been shaping this congregation for decades now? Well, the only source material is Luke's Acts of the Apostles. That's all we know about Stephen. And Stephen was in that first congregation in Jerusalem. It was somewhat communal in nature. People were sharing their resources. And as in any organization, things were starting to fall through the cracks. Complaints were being brought to those apostles that were in residence in the community that certain members of the community were not getting their fair share. Within the Jewish community in Jerusalem and elsewhere in Roman Palestine, it wasn't just a homogenized population. There were what are known as Hellenized Jews, Greek-speaking Jews, people of the diaspora who were back, who had been influenced by Hellenistic culture, Greek culture. There was a certain rub between the Palestinian Jews and these Hellenized Jews. I'm sure the locals thought, oh, well, they're just, those people, the Hellenized Jews, those bumpkins, one of those sorts of things. The widows, the Hellenized Greek widows, were not getting their fair share. And when this was brought to the attention of these apostles, they came up with a plan. Part of that plan, I feel quite sure, and it alludes to that in the writings, we can't do it all. Yeah, we knew Jesus, but we can't do it all. So somebody else has got to pick up the ball on this. And so they appointed these individuals to take care, to make certain that everybody was receiving their fair share of the resources of the community. One of those is Stephen. And he's the one who's listed first, and he's the one that gets the most space on the page. He gets the most description. He seems to have been somebody who had a heart for reaching out to take care of folks. What happened as a result of his movement into leadership is he became a more known face. It empowered him, you might say, to take on a broader role. So not only is he somebody who's looking after making sure that folks are being well fed and are receiving their fair share, but then he begins to speak out. He's preaching. Becomes a street preacher. He also does enough preaching in synagogues and talking to people in synagogues, bringing the way of Christ to the folks in the synagogues, that, guess what? They take umbrage at him. What he was bringing to them was something that they were feeling threatened by. When he starts telling the people in the synagogue, oh yeah, Jesus is going to tear down the temple in 3 days and rebuild it. Well, needless to say, that sounds threatening. He continues with this preaching to the degree that he gets called before the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was controlled leadership. It was leadership that was controlled by the Romans. It's kind of like the Vichy government during the Second World War in France. When Stephen refused to stop saying what he'd been saying, they took him out and they stoned him to death. And there was a young man by the name of Saul of Tarsus who was holding their cloaks while they threw rocks. He became the Apostle Paul. So, what is it about Stephen? We've got this man who has a heart for the community. He is someone who is respected in the community. He's respected by the leadership. He's someone who is going to make sure that there is an equal distribution of the resources. He takes care of us. He's also not afraid to speak truth to power. He will stand up and he will say what he's got to say. What also happened was that he proved one of the things that he was saying to the Sanhedrin, in that he was telling them, you always kill the prophets. And of course, they did. They killed him. Well, they didn't personally, they had it done. So he was somebody who, knowing the consequences of his actions, knowing the consequences of speaking truth to power, was willing to do so and face what was going to come. And at the very last minute, what does he do? He sees Jesus standing at God's right hand. The heavens part, he sees Jesus standing at God's right hand. And he says, don't hold this sin against me. Now there's an echo here of Jesus on the cross. And so when we think about following the way of Christ, the example that's set here with Stephen is one who does that. He cares for the poor. He cares for those who are on the edges of their community, people on the fringe. He speaks truth to power. He's willing to take the consequences, and he forgives those that kill him. And this is our patron. That's a tall order. I mean, it would have been much easier if it had been, somebody who was just nice. Did really good coffee out. That would be really great from a certain perspective, a certain kind of comfortable perspective. And I think that the emphasis here on that following the way of Christ is we see that. We see that in the life of this congregation. I don't think we're there yet. We aren't quite in the fullness of either Stephen or Christ. But you see those influences. You see the care for those who are in need. And a willingness of some to speak truth to power. And deal with the consequences. And there's this, there's signs of that rather amazing forgiveness. Because anytime you get people together, eventually there's going to be conflict of some sort, small or large. And I've been around this community long enough to see those things come and then be dealt with and pass. It's a tall order. But following the way of Christ is a tall order. It's not kid stuff. It's not kid stuff. If in fact, one of the signs of following the way of Christ is being willing to face the inevitability of blowback when speaking truth to power, well, that's a tall order. And not a lot of us are cut out to do it. We're just not there yet. But all along that path, there are signs, there are signposts, there are lessons to be taught. And the reason it's called the way of Christ is that there's not an expectation that it's not an all or nothing thing. You know what I'm saying? We have this way. We are walking this path. It is a learning path. It is a transformation path. When our lives are changed, when we grow, it's like learning to walk. It's like learning to be an adult. We stand up, we take a few steps, we stumble. We get up, we take a few more steps, and we stumble. And we just keep doing that. The way of Christ. Each of us is in a different place along this way of Christ. And we hold up this example of Stephen, who is living out the way of Christ in his way, as our teacher, our patron, our exemplar, as one who is an icon of us, a prototype, one that we could shape ourselves to be like. Not just every individual, but as a community of faith, of followers of the way, that we as a collective being, as an organism, are emulating Stephen, who was emulating Jesus. It is such a powerful image, and it's one that's often squandered. It's one that we can easily be distracted on. And if there is such a thing as Satan, that would be, for the American people, Satan's greatest work is distraction. We've got more distractions than we can even engage in a given day. But by periodically bringing our minds back, refocusing ourselves back on this way of Christ, and how it is that each of us is embracing that way, we keep coming back to that center, coming back to that place, that particular image, and following that in a way that bears fruit, that changes lives, that transforms not only our individual lives or the lives of the people of this faith community, but the wider community in the world as a whole. For each of us whose life is transformed, that's one more step down that way of Christ, that path towards the kingdom, towards the reign of God. That is the path, the way of Christ. Amen.